Good morning.
Hey, hope the internet is kind and behaves itself. Hi.
Fingers crossed. I'm home today, and Eric is slow, or internet is slow. Eric's not slow. We all know that.
Oh my
So
God,
fingers.
no. Okay, well, I'm
He
kind
says,
of
"What's up,
cash,
Mom?"
kind of cash today because I'm still in vacation mode. I've seriously got to get out of that vacation mode because I got
Nice.
so much to do. Hey, I love you, Eric.
He says, "Hey, I love you, Mom," mocking you.
Uh, all right, we're going to talk about some interesting things today. Of course, we always do. I think it's interesting anyway. Uh, Here's a little short question before we delve into the main topic. Actually, it might end up being a long topic, but more than one person, blog member, has asked me to ask this, and I'll read what this person says. Dr. Raymond Rife cured 16 out of 16 terminally ill patients. In 1992, he started researching cancer. In 32, he managed to isolate a cancer microorganism known as VX virus. A year after, he designed the universal microscope that could magnify an object 60,000 times their normal size. He used light frequency resonance to destroy organisms using a natural frequency without destroying adjacent tissue. He named this process modal oscillatory rate. In 34, Dr. Milbank Johnson, a different guy, who was to declare the results of Rife's cancer therapy, was lethally poisoned and his documents vanished. Big Pharma. They don't want any easy way to cure cancer. They want you to spend some big bucks. Anyway, Rife's laboratories were set on fire and ruined. Dr. Nemes, who had replicated a part of Rife's work, died in an inexplicable fire along with the destruction of all his research papers. Royal Rife was murdered by a fatal combination of Valium and alcohol in 71 at the Grossmont Hospital. Is that because cancer is a $160 million business?
He says, "Mom, the motivation behind all of this. First of all, not behind the research, but I feel like the way the passing occurred." He says the motivation behind it was money. Also, the potential for success was obvious. It was recognized, he says, and basically put to a stop. It's like somebody went after this person to put it to a stop. But I don't think that the intentions were to completely get rid of the documentation. I think that that part wanted to be mimicked or saved, but obviously things didn't quite work out that way. Um, these, Eric is just kind of talking about. I have no idea what this means, anything, but there's something about this scientist, whatever he was working on, whatever discoveries he made, something about oxygen or oxygen, the way oxygen affects cells versus the virus or the illness. It has a lot to do with his discoveries with the use of oxygen too.
Okay.
He's talking about. So I'm not sure where that falls, but um, yeah. But he says that. He says, "Mom, there was a lot of money. Like he makes me feel like there was like this researcher was on the brink of sharing or some sort of contract to where you know money was at stake, like a big exposure about to happen, and I feel like that's when it was stopped. It was the timing was. Eric says it was all about the timing."
Well, Eric, was it somebody involved in Big Pharma, a big pharmaceutical company, or several big pharmaceutical companies?
I don't think so. That doesn't resonate with him. He makes me feel like it was peers that would be like his competition. If you want to call it competition, it seems like there were other researchers either that researched and worked with him but wanted the credit for the discovery and wanted, obviously the money too. I don't think it was pharmaceutically related. For what it's worth, Eric says now it is. I feel like he says in our current time now. Um, there's a lot of information known about how to stop the spread of cancer, but he says, Mom, like the research that we're talking about with these scientists back then, or the treatments rather,
Yeah.
cost a lot of money, and they don't want to spend the money. They know it's like they know how to do it, but they don't want to spend the money to do it. So I feel like that's why we keep seeing, pharmaceuticals being recycled and pushed rather than new research, new leads on research, he says.
Well, also, I saw this YouTube where this doctor just blew up about the pharmaceutical companies saying that cancer, only like 95% of cancers are really cured by chemotherapy, and oncologists are the only doctors that actually get paid for prescribing, chemotherapy to their patients. They get a kickback. And he says that nutrients and other things, natural things that Big Pharma cannot profit by, can often yield better results. I saw also this, a blog member sent me this YouTube about this Irish Shepherd who contracted swine flu vaccine, and he got really sick, developed ARDS, adult respiratory distress syndrome, and was on a ventilator, life support for months. And his family, I don't know how this came about, insisted that the doctors give him high dose IV vitamin C. And the doctors laughed and refused. No, 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 that's just vitamins. And eventually they got their way, and in one day, the whited out lungs on x-ray were completely clear. In like 3 days, he was awake and fine. So, and I hear from other scientists that vitamin C, high dose IV vitamin C, can cure just about anything, including snake bites. So tell me about that.
He says his response is like this. He says, Mom, it's true. He says, if you take away all pharmaceuticals, we still have everything we need to achieve health. He says it's important for, I have to recognize this because he won't stop saying it. It has nothing to do with anything. But when, Elisa, when you are on something or talking about something that, I don't know, Erik is just admiring your little titches and the way you talk, like a snake bite, like the way you said that.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm
He loves the
goofy.
way you get all.
I'm just a
He's just like, don't you love the way she talks
freaking
sometimes?
nerd. Is what you're trying to say. I know. My
He's
kids
so
laugh at
funny.
me.
He just keeps saying it. So anyway, but he says disease. He says first of all, he says let's back up a minute and recognize the fact that disease didn't start because of the lack of medication, of pharmaceuticals. He says, so when disease is developed or begins, illness, whatever, he says there are much more natural, easier ways to heal, to restore your body's health. When he says easier, he's talking about like no side effects. He
Oh,
says
nice.
the pharmaceuticals, there's a lot of things that happen. You might cure one thing, but you might also disrupt a lot of other things.
True, but but
And of course,
but to be fair, there are a lot of natural things that can have harmful side effects too, like foxglove, which is the plant that you make digoxin, heart failure medicine, etc. And it's highly toxic if you take certain amounts. So I'm sure it just depends on that
he
natural
says,
substance. So
yeah, he
check with
says,
your doctor. Don't just go out in the backyard and start eating your weeds, people. You know.
right. He says that's the trouble, Mom. It's the correct amount of holistic medications or herbal remedies. Knowing what he says because in their natural state they're so much more potent. So it only takes a little bit sometimes, but we are people of quick response or quick results, convenience. We need it now. So oftentimes you see people, doing more harm than good because
Yeah.
they don't educate themselves first when it comes to holistic remedies, he says. So he says too with light and sound frequencies. He says no no herbal anything, no medicines. If we're just talking about light and sound therapies, Those are very beneficial too.
Hmm.
He says, talking about the vitamin C, if you get the right forms, he says, it's very potent. Um, he
Well,
says it's like nothing. Go ahead.
we're all energy, including the pathogens, the diseases, etc. I mean, it's all energy. So, and color and sound and things like that, light, they affect energy. I was really pleased to watch my daughter Michelle studying. She's in nursing school now, and she's studying a chapter on energy medicine and distance healing and chakras and all that. And I know that I think MD Anderson has an energy medicine department. So the world is coming around. It's good.
He says slowly but surely.
Anything else on this subject before we go on?
He's encouraging people to just open their minds to, and he's directly pointing to like sound therapy. Um, this is something that you can't hurt yourself with, he
True.
says. Because he says, Mom, a big part of it too is when people are going through illness, they feel like they have no power. They feel like,
Yeah.
powerless and sometimes hopeless. So, sound therapies are an easy go to where you can't hurt yourself. He says, your body is going to take what it needs energetically. So, he's just encouraging people to look into using sound therapies themselves to try to achieve healing. So
How can we find out more about that? Just Google it or any specific advice?
he says
Download
there's a
something on
lot of
iTunes?
places.
Oh, sorry.
He says there's a lot of places online where you can research different frequencies and what areas of the body that they correlate with, what areas of the, what chakras they correlate with. There's also, he says, a lot of physical like locations, like a brick and mortar that you can go to and receive. Like he's showing like tuning forks,
Really? Okay.
um, energy healing with like differently. This is his words. Sometimes his words don't match his energy, but he's saying like differently calibrated tuning forks.
Okay.
So it's like tuning forks that put off a different pitch that also provide healing. So he says, do your research, people, but
And,
I
and
promise you it's helpful.
and light therapy, the same thing. There are probably brick and mortar places to for light therapy, or
He
some
says
sort of
that's right.
lamp we can buy, or something.
He says light therapy is a little bit harder to, to just go and access. Like you can look up and read about it, but sound therapy is something you can find easily on the internet and
Okay.
play it for yourself at home. Light therapy is something that requires a little more knowledge, he says, and potentially guidance from somebody who's like an expert with light
Yeah.
therapy. So, but there's little things that you can do too. He's talking at like the level of the chakras. Um, because light, different colors too have a frequency which correlate with different areas of the body. And then he's like, yeah, you know the rest.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
says
Sure.
so. He says look up what you need. If it's hip pain, back pain, look at the chakra that correlates with. Start doing all your research and put your awareness there at that level, and start working from the inside out.
Okay.
So what do you mean spiritual level to the physical level?
Okay, that sounds awesome. All right, now let's go on to the main topic, and that is alcoholism. I went on this cruise a long time since I've been on one, and of course I get the ultimate drink package. So I was like, I'm going to get my money's worth. So we had like 3 glasses of red wine every day. I think we probably broke the bank for them, but now we're drying out our liver, so that's good. Anyway, but I'm wondering about the alcohol. What is the spiritual basis? I mean, tell me what you can from the spiritual side about alcoholism.
He's going like this. He's looking at you like, that's a good one, Mom.
It is. A
He
lot of
says,
people suffer from that.
he's kind of laughing at you when you said you got to get your money's worth. He's like, oh, he says, do you ever not?
I know. I
But
try.
the he says alcoholism has a lot to do, obviously, with the mind. He says the thought process. People that abuse alcohol or are addicted to alcohol often are in a place where he says it's like they have their self convinced that they need it. it's not just a habit. It's they have themselves convinced at like a mental and emotional level, he says, that they need it. So it may not even be out of like fiending for it, so to speak, that I need to go get some, but
Not like
more
a
it's
body, not like a body, like a physiologic need. Is that what you're saying? It may not be
right,
that necessarily,
right,
although it can be, you know.
right. He says not always. He says a lot of times people just convince themselves that they need it. It's a scapegoat, he said. So I guess it's like an outlet, like
Yeah, like, oh, I'm
just
grieving really badly. I really need this. You know, I miss my uh, daughter who died a year ago, and I deserve this because it makes me feel better and it helps my grief. It probably doesn't. It's a depressant, but
right.
are you? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. He's talking about like, coming home and saying, "Oh, I had a shitty day at work. I'm just
Ah,
going to drink some whiskey and it'll all be better." So a lot of times he says people that's how it starts. People use it to escape reality only to find out that reality comes back and hits them harder each
mm,
time,
yeah.
they sober up. He says when you see it so severe that someone doesn't know sobriety for, an extended period of time, these are people who are, he's showing them being disillusioned from self, not knowing who they are, not being in connection, not grounded to reality, just very disillusioned and having no connection to anything really, having no desire or motivations in life, which ground us. If we're motivated to write a book, if we're motivated to become a teacher, those are things that ground us into our reality, into our experience, and help us become, productive. And he's saying, when someone gets so severe in it that they give up on everything, that's because they're not grounded. Oftentimes, people that experience addiction, severe addictions, are not grounded in who they are. They're not grounded in themselves in this life. So that's why you see them. It's like their security blanket, mom. He says, like they
Okay.
don't know where else they fit in or what else feels comfortable, but they always have control over that thing.
Mm,
So they always kind of go to it, whether it's a drug or alcohol.
mm.
Um, the nature of the addiction is it's like a security blanket. Nothing else makes me feel comfortable, but at least I have this thing. It's a control thing too, he says.
Well, what can they do to ground themselves?
He says for people that are like the latter of the ones that we just discussed that are in it pretty deeply, he says these people they need help. They need treatment. They can't
Yeah,
when it's this they can't be self-directed or reliant upon themselves to pull themselves out. They can, but it's pretty rare, he
yeah.
says. So if you start to see, when if you're not someone who's in it that severe, but you see a pattern possibly beginning, even if it's a loved one, he says you have to be able to separate from that habit, that addiction, that outlet, and define yourself. You can't use that in any way to define who you are. So whether it's I'm a teacher, I'm an author, I'm a firefighter, whatever
I'm a
it may be,
mother. I'm a wife. Okay. I'm a friend.
you start there, he says, and then you find out, what makes you a teacher. Is it the kids that you work with? Is it, the creative leverage that you have? And start defining yourself little by little to ground yourself. Um, that's where you sort of reconnect with your personal power, your motivation, he says.
Hmm.
Um, and then there becomes less of a need for the alcohol or the abuse of it rather. There's nothing wrong with drinking alcohol, but if it becomes, oh, I can't deal with life, I need to drink,
Hmm.
um, or smoke or whatever, he says then you should probably be really cautious and choose your actions wisely because it can easily be a downhill slippery slope, he
Oh,
says.
yeah. So, what can somebody do if they have an urge for a drink or, a drug?
He says, well, first, he says he wants to talk about alcohol because it's a little bit different. He says, if someone has an urge for a drink, it's been a long, rough day, I just want a glass of wine. Mindfulness is key. He says, being mindful in that time frame, I'm going to have this glass of wine and just relax and enjoy my evening. that's fine. But he says, be mindful in that moment that if you're having this glass of wine, sort of look at the emotional motivation behind it, he
Okay.
says. If you're having this glass of wine or this shot of whiskey because you're pissed off or
Ah.
frustrated or you feel like a failure, he says it becomes an emotional
Oh
attachment,
yeah.
then sort of disillusions you from who you are. It separates you from knowing who you are. It's
Okay.
like that alcohol, you begin to identify yourself with that. And again, this is where I think he says like they convince themselves that they need it
Mm-hmm.
to function as their self.
Okay.
So this deep weeded mind thing. Um, but he says if you have that urge, he says there's nothing wrong with a drink or two or four. He says, but look at the emotional motivation behind it and be mindful in that. If it's becoming more habitual to where it's an outlet, you should be cautious. He's like throwing up these yellow flags of caution.
Or
So,
when you start saying, "Oh,
uh,
it's 5 o'clock somewhere," then that's always a telltale sign. Well,
it's
are there?
9 a.m.
Is there just a couple more questions, and we'll close. Is it ever a spiritual contract to come in as an alcoholic or an addict?
He says most of the time, Mom, it's the spiritual contract to experience like a disillusioned reality
Ah,
or a separation from reality, but it's free will that manifests the
ah.
alcoholism.
Well, why would somebody want to come in with this disillusioned reality, sense of reality?
He says it gives polarity, it teaches you more about who you are. He
Okay.
says, this is my, this is a little interesting. He says it's really no different than somebody experiencing coming in and experiencing like schizophrenia
Mm-hmm.
through free will, being disillusioned and disconnected from reality.
Okay.
Um, but it manifests itself as as schizophrenia through free will. So it just kind of, he says it varies, Mom. It depends on the person, the soul, and what they're here to learn, how they're here to grow,
Okay.
and like the expansion that they're trying to achieve.
Okay. Are there any cures, at least long, possibly long term, or like taking ayahuasca, doing an ayahuasca trip, or DMT, or anything just like totally out of the box?
He says both of those that you mentioned, DMT and ayahuasca, are would be effective like resets. He calls it. It's like a
Okay.
reset. Um, it's mental counseling. He says if somebody is in a place where um, they have this dependency, mental counseling because it's a mental. Most of the time, it's a mental issue. He
Yeah.
says emotional. So it has to start there.
So, what will the
So.
ayahuasca along? I mean, what would the ayahuasca or the DMT? Which one is better, actually? Should you go to Peru and do ayahuasca, or Costa Rica and do
Uh,
DMT? Whatever.
Whatever DMT is, he's resonating more with that. He says if he
Okay.
has to choose one or the other, he would choose DMT.
And what does it
He makes
do?
me feel like whatever they are, he makes me feel like both of them give um, like a hard look at reality. It's like they awaken you in a raw state where you have like more understanding, or it's like almost like super consciousness, like
Okay.
heightened awareness.
Mm.
Um, you understand not only the effects of what you're doing, why you're doing it, but also how to change it. It's like, but he says you have to go in there with the intentions, Mom. So it's like it's almost like a past life regression. Go in there with the intentions
Okay.
to heal this issue. Um, Go in there with the intentions to heal the alcoholism, and you'll be able to see a much broader perspective of what it is, and how it affects your life.
Okay. Um, what was I going to say about that? I lost my train of thought. Is there any one way we can tweak our perspective that will help us with this problem? Like a mantra,
He
whatever. I
does.
mean, oh, two.
He says.
It's a
He says two
twofer.
ways. Yep. He
It's
says first of all
BOGO.
two ways.
Eric's giving us a
Um,
BOGO. Buy one, get
Yep,
one.
it's a good deal. He says, don't don't judge these people. He's just kind of speaking from his heart. He says, in dealing with this, if it's a loved one, don't criticize them. It's not going to help. It's just going to make them want to escape that criticism. Don't judge them for what they're going through. It's not going to help anything.
No, of course
He
not.
says, if there's a mantra that I would suggest, he's saying, I am strong,
Okay.
because it's in the moments of emotional weakness, or but that word means so much, though. When he says weakness, vulnerability, lack of control, when people want to feel like they need to have control or convince themselves, this is something easy to pick up and go to, he says. So I am strong is a really good
Okay.
mantra. But you have to believe it too. He says you can't just say it.
No, no, I'm strong. I'm strong. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So, one thing I would like to say is that it's very important, though, to address underlying causes like depression, PTSD, anxiety, etc. So, a healthcare provider, mental health care provider, or otherwise, really needs to be involved. Now, I want to tell you guys, I never have announced this on the YouTube, that we have a free mobile app for both, iOS and Android. You can go to the iTunes store and get it, or you can go to mobile Google Play, I think, for Androids. But it's channeling Erik, and it puts everything in one spot. You get notifications every time a YouTube comes on, a blog post, a tweet, an Instagram, whatever. And it's
That's right.
very clean and
It's
very
really,
cool and free.
yep, and it's really easy to use, guys. Check it out.
Super, much easier than going, oh, let me see if she has any YouTube going on. All right, sounds good. Later, alligator.
Later.
Bye.